With over 500 stores across 2 nations and occupying a 50% share in the DIY hardware market, Bunnings has undeniably conquered Australia. In the company's 80+ active years, it has blazed a path of blood, squashing all competition under a steel-capped boot. But with new off-topic product ranges hitting shelves and Green Life suppliers accusing the business of slave-like treatment, a question is raised. What does Bunnings really want? The answer might be a tough pill to swallow, but it goes to show. Never wound what you can't kill. In the winter of June 1886, the SS Elderslie came to port in Fremantle, Western Australia, and offered step 2 men, Robert and Arthur Bunning. Originally from Hackney, England, they intended to visit a sister before leaving for California, but after landing contract work building additions to the Fremantle Lunatic Asylum, they elected to stay. In the following years, they accumulated a property portfolio consisting of 4 brickyards and completed several more building contracts. But while 1890s WA was a land of opportunity, thanks partly to a new gold rush in the region, it wasn't all beer and skittles. A boom in exports of jarrah wood, a popular choice for cabinetry, meant the Bunning brothers would struggle to source it for their own work. Their bad luck manifested on the family front too. Arthur would suffer a detrimental horse riding accident around this time that led him to relinquish most of his management responsibilities to Robert, who, in response to their supply dilemma, would make a decision that outlined the Bunnings strategy going forward. No longer would he fight for his bread, he would own the bakery. Though nervous, Robert sold his 4 brickyards and went all in on timber, using the funds to purchase his first sawmill at North Dandalup in 1897. 10 years later, Bunnings was finally born, under the name Bunning Brothers Proprietary Limited. In 1914, that sawmill burned down, but the revenue it generated funded the establishment of several more across southeastern WA. It was around this time too that Robert started serving as an executive on the Sawmillers Association. He was known to spruik the importance of free enterprise and freedom of trade, especially against then timber powerhouse Millars. Arthur died in 1929, and Robert rather abruptly in 1936, so management of Bunnings fell to his 3 sons. And with that, their next idea brewed. It took shape in 1961 with the opening of the first ever Bunnings hardware store in Perth, and with it, a new chapter in the Bunnings saga began. Up until this point, the Bunnings growth strategy was fairly run-of-the-mill. Robert and Arthur purchased 1 sawmill, then reinvested the revenue from it to build more. This is called vertical integration, which refers to a business taking control of each step in their supply chain. Before 1961, the company likely would have acted as a supplier for other businesses and tradespeople, meaning their most direct form of revenue came from a kind of middleman. Opening their first hardware store eliminated this step in the process, allowing Bunnings to sell directly to their customers. However, vertical integration can only take you so far, so if they wanted to continue growth, their direction would have to change, from vertical to horizontal, or in normal people terms, they started acquiring firms like Infinity Stones. The sawmilling facilities of Hawker Siddeley Building Supplies were the first to be acquired in 1970, which was said to have nearly doubled the size of the company. This move was one of the final conducted by the second generation Bunning brothers, so it's funny to think that it mimicked their father's first and most consequential. From there, cousins Bob and Gavin formed the 3rd generation, and one of the first things they did with their power was purchase Millars. Once a timber overlord, then a rival, but now finally, a subject. This, combined with the acquisition of Alco Handyman stores in 1990, was an ironic shift. Robert Bunnings' business, the same one he campaigned should have a fair chance against timber industry titans, had now become one, and from here, it would only get worse. With the acquisitions in this period, we can see the core pillars that make up modern Bunnings begin to take shape. The timber yard being the first, and the DIY catalogue being second. The third came with the 1993 acquisition of McEwen's and their expansive garden centres, which shifted the prominence of Green Life products in Bunnings from an afterthought to a tenet. But not only did the McEwen's purchase signal a deeper entrance into this market, it enabled a massive expansion onto the east coast of Australia. See, McEwen's operated stores of the same name in Victoria and New South Wales, but they also owned Harry's and Lloyd's in South Australia and Campbell's in Queensland. They had a well-established presence in the region, so the Bunnings strategy of buying and swiftly rebranding stores would be jarring, especially considering they were relatively unknown outside of WA. And so the rebrand had to be eased in. You can see this process in action through this McEwen's ad from the late 90s with its hybrid Bunnings logo. It's like a parasite taking over its host. And speaking of parasites, Wesfarmers, smelling yet another monopoly forming, conquered the conquerors for about $600 million in 1994. Bob and Gavin Bunning would step down with the buyout, ending their family's involvement with their business and forecasting the climax of its transformation. Wesfarmers wouldn't wait a wink to show off their new toy, opening the first large format or big box Bunnings store in Sunshine, Melbourne, the very same year. They called it Bunnings Warehouse, and as you can imagine, it was a runaway success. The acquisition era saw its final major act with Wesfarmers' purchase of the Howard Smith Group, including subsidiary BBC Hardware and its big box offshoot Hardware House. And after that, Bunnings wept, for there were no worlds left to conquer. So if you've got any sense about you, you're probably questioning how any of this constitutes fair competition in the free market. The ACCC were wondering the same thing too, but the answer they came up with wasn't what you're expecting. The ACCC would empower Bunnings to further erode competition in their domain when it came to the only other business that, at that point, had ever posed a threat to them, Mitre 10. By 1994, Mitre 10 had held a foothold in Australia for decades. The company formed around the same time Bunnings entered the retail space, and from there, established dozens of outlets across the country. This included several big box stores called Mitre 10 Mega, which, as we've seen with Hardware House, are like vacant shells to a very overbearing crowd. Sure enough, Bunnings came knocking around 2004 and succeeded in their endeavour to literally buy a retail site from a competing business and rebrand it to their name 5 times. Normally, something like this would be impossible. I mean, I personally have never heard of Woolies buying a Coles location and then turning it into one of their stores, so there had to be something else at play. Turns out it came down to how Mitre 10 operates as a business. It's a cooperative. The brand is licensed out to franchisees who can then open an independent, privately owned and operated store under the Mitre 10 label. And since they are privately operated, store owners have the freedom to get paid off by the competition. And of the many stores approached, dozens would accept. In 2008, the ACCC declared these acquisitions insignificant to the status quo of free market competition. An interesting call to say the least, but even off scot-free, I doubt Bunnings and Wesfarmers were overly fond of the heat. So sitting upon their pile of cash, Bunnings had to devise a new growth strategy, a new goal, and that was to become the one-stop shop. The only store for all of your DIY, outdoors, and lifestyle needs. You can trace the beginnings of this idea all the way back to the Wesfarmers buyout, one of the products of which was the implementation of price beating. It's a line from the Aussie Bible, where you find a competitor's lower price on the same in-stock item will beat it by 10%. For a lot of other smaller stores, this 10% reduction could drastically reduce revenue, but for Bunnings, it's almost negligible. They could afford to lose a little if it meant their competition lost more. It's an offer only they could provide, and why would you go anywhere else if you can get it 10% cheaper, guaranteed, at Bunnings? This policy worked to the detriment of all Bunnings competitors, including Mitre 10, who would attempt to fight back on a separate front. See, both Bunnings and Mitre 10 offer trade services. These programs are made specifically for tradespeople of all kinds, allowing them to take advantage of bulk discounts, get advice, and hire special services. Originally, these services were housed within Bunnings and Mitre 10 stores themselves, usually as a little booth tucked away in a corner. But come the early 2010s, both would attempt to spin off their trade services into separate retail locations. While Mitre 10 trade centers never really took off, Bunnings trade centers thrived. Nowadays, they stand alongside Bunnings and Bunnings Warehouse locations as an integral third branch of the brand, making up as much as 35% of its overall revenue. However, due to this outward expansion, Bunnings lost a lot of the control it once had over its supply chain. So if the brand's goals were to manifest, it'd have to cooperate with third-party suppliers. That being said, if recent developments are anything to be believed, Bunnings is a one-stop shop for turmoil. Providers of Green Life goods have levied particular vitriol at the brand, with one producer allegedly being treated like slaves and serfs. Another current supplier, who remained anonymous fearing legal recourse, claimed working with Bunnings was unprofitable, and in some cases, had them operating their nursery at a loss. Their business earned such little revenue from their supply contracts, less than $20,000 a year, that they didn't even need to pay income tax. That amount of income is hardly sustainable for 2 people, let alone 2 business owners that likely employ a number of other people. It is just baffling to think that Bunnings would leverage its influence to screw over the same family units that not only make up its customer base, but that build the company into what it is today. Consolidating all of this, we come to understand how Bunnings plans to become the one-stop shop, by raising the skill floor of every market it has a stake in. A skill floor refers to the minimum level of skill a player must possess to play a video game. It's not a business term, but it does help to visualize things. And with that, you'll notice that each of the examples I mentioned are things that only Bunnings could do. And that's because they've become powerful enough to do so. They're going to keep using that power. Keep entering new markets by introducing pet care and electrical vehicle product ranges. Keep purchasing other brands like Beaumont Tiles and Toolkit Depot to further strangle competition. And if it hasn't become obvious, I think it might be too late to stop. So well done, Wesfarmers, you've won. Unless another conglomerate with wealthy backing decides to launch a coordinated effort to take you down, you've well and truly mastered the market.
Lowest prices are just the beginning.